So Dallas, let's start with Dallas. The Dallas Mavericks, as we sit here, are 8-12. You tweeted out earlier today that they are a game out of being the fourth worst team in the NBA.
Sole possession. Yeah.
Sole possession being the fourth worst team in the NBA. It's not what you want. They've lost 5 games in a row. Doncic came out after the most recent game and said he was happier with their effort. The previous game, he said that I think something to the effect of guys weren't trying or didn't feel like we were trying. The better effort game, the most recent game, notably, did not feature Mr. Porzingis because he sat out because it was the second of a back-to-back, and he is perpetually recovering from an injury that happened 2 years ago.
3 years ago, right?
Holy shit!
Yeah,
happened in February of 2018.
Yeah, almost 3 years.
Okay, so he's
like
still
February 6th.
This was the most recent knee injury. This was the other.
Right.
This is yes. Okay,
but that is compounded by the fact that he had ACL tear, which the weight distribution and his mobility, and it's all kinetic.
Yes. And I just here's the thing, and I know you've been gearing up for this, and I want you to have the floor. I want to say 2 really quick things. Dennis Smith Jr. this week, and good for him.
Mm-hmm.
Kudos to him for being. Holy shit! Did you see that?
I heard something fall.
A roll of paper towels just fell off a shelf behind me.
It's Dennis Smith Jr. saying thank you.
Do you think? Or do you think it's the ghost of Dennis Smith Jr. was like, don't talk about me?
It's possible.
Anyway, wow. That was scary. So Dennis Smith, I swear I'm not making this up. It's right there.
I heard it.
So Dennis Smith Jr., big of him going to the G League. It's what you want from Dennis Smith Jr. after we've seen him over the last year and change. It's not what you want from the one player that is still here from the Porzingis trade. So that's out there. And the other thing I want to say is, to everybody being like, oh, this trade was a home run for the Knicks and it's the greatest trade in the history of trades. I will never, ever, ever, ever change my opinion on 2 things. One, it was shitty process to bank on something happening that was not a certainty. And people will listen to that and be like, you're an idiot. KD was coming if the injury didn't happen. And that's fine. We have a difference of opinion. I don't believe that. You do. It's okay. We don't have to say anything else about it. And the second thing that you'll never get me able to change my opinion on is I would have loved to see what else was out there if they did not prioritize dumping. And I've seen the tree. I think Benchwarmer made it up and it's totally valid. That said, you could have just kept Tim Hardaway Jr. and Courtney Lee on the books. It's $30 million. You didn't need that money to sign Marcus Morris or Julius Randle. Marcus Morris turned into the pick that turned into Manuel quickly. There was another path forward. And it'll always make me wonder, was there a trade out there where we could have gotten picks and a better young player? If you're waiting for me to sit here and be like, greatest trade in the history of trades, I still can't do that. But boy, is this a different conversation than we would have been having at most of the last 2 years. So Jeremy, with that, and feel free to call me out because I know my opinions are not shared by most, but I just wanted to preface the conversation with that, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, I'd say that your second point, the way you phrased it is the right way to think about it. We don't know what was out there. We really don't. It'd be nice to know if we did. It's more when I read or hear people saying like they could have gotten a better offer. We don't have the information to go off of that. And also, if you actually go back to 2019 when he was traded and canvass the league, you're looking at a 7'3" player coming off of a torn ACL who had yet to play that year, who is in line for a huge payday, who was facing at the time a pretty serious allegation, whatever it may be in terms of the whether it was true or not, but that was the case at the time.
It was
package all of that together, shop it around the league. That's not the most enticing of packages. It just isn't. It's very possible that we as fans overvalue the players that are ours because they're ours. We are possessive of them. We want to make them worth more than they are. I would love to know what other offers are out there. Absolutely. And I think that if you swap out even Dennis Smith Jr. for like Jalen Brunson, you're looking at this very differently.
Oh, can we have Jalen? Can we do it over again?
I would love that. And you know that because, I mean, Leon Rose's first client was Rick Brunson, Jalen Brunson's father. So, you know, it's that sort of thinking where, again, you can't just say, oh, well, this is the trade. And I wish that they had taken this offer, that offer, because we don't know. But I do think the other thing is that a lot of people tend to say like, oh, well, like Emmanuel Quickley is not part of the Kristaps Porzingis trade, or like, you know, one thing or another, because they still would have had money left over. Listen, the Kristaps Porzingis trade changed everything, the entire complexity of the team. You've got one path that's with Kristaps Porzingis and one path without. Any moves that you make after you trade Kristaps Porzingis are interlinked. They're intertwined with the trade, directly or indirectly. They are a catalyst, or they are a result of what happened. And so, you know, like you could keep Kristaps Porzingis, and chances are, I believe that if Kristaps Porzingis stayed, hadn't been traded yet, the Knicks still would have found a way, after missing out on KD and Kyrie or whatever, to go after someone like Julius Randle, because it always seemed to make sense to have pairing Randle and Porzingis. There was a lot of scuttlebutt about the idea of pairing them together, and we know that Mills and Perry went with him. And you know, you can think about them together, but what else is there? I don't know. Again, you just have to look at the fact that they're two different scenarios. It's not just the KP trade and what came of it. It's everything else.
You can't analyze it in a vacuum.
Exactly. It's the entire offseason. And the truth is that we really don't know what a path with Kristaps Porzingis and the leftover cap space would have looked like.
You're 100% right.
We know what the trade and the subsequent things that followed do look like. And, you know, the one thing, the most important thing that we talk about is the best ability is availability. It's true. Over the last 3 seasons, right? Julius Randle played 73 games for the Pelicans, missed 9. Last season, he played 64 games for the Knicks, missed 1. Only reason he missed it was to attend his grandmother's funeral.
Oh, that's right.
This year has played 21 games. Porzingis, the season that Julius Randle missed 9 games, Porzingis missed all 82. Last season, he played 57 out of 65 regular season games, missed 8, and then missed 3 out of 6 playoff games because he hurt his MCL. And then this season, he's played 9 of 20 possible Mavs games. That's a lot of money invested. And my big thing with the Mavs is this. I have no problem with them taking a shot at Luka Doncic, because that was the right call. If you can trade your own picks for a player like Luka Doncic, that's fine. Yeah. The issue is when you don't play with house money, you could get in a really precarious situation like the one the Mavs are finding them in. And that's the difference between where the Knicks are at right now and where the Mavs were, because the Knicks can afford to play with house money because they have the Mavs picks. The Mavs traded from their own bank. And this, you know, we talk about Bradley Beal and maybe even Zach LaVine, and we'll get to Porzingis in a moment. But when I see everything about Beal, for example, it reminds me so much of the Kyrie Irving situation when
in Boston.
Well, when he was in Cleveland.
Oh, when he was in Cleveland. Sorry. Yeah.
And the idea was like, well, we've got Kristaps Porzingis. We could trade for him and we figure it out. And my philosophy is like, no, because you're talking about the margin of error for messing up is razor thin if you do that.
Yep. And
of course he went to Boston. It didn't even work out there, but Boston traded the Nets picks. They traded they didn't trade their own assets. They traded Brooklyn's picks for Kyrie.
Because they had
Irving.
A surplus.
And they had a better team on paper and in reality with Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford. They had a complete team where they were like, we think Kyrie is the missing piece for us to go. Turns out that wasn't the case, but the gamble was worth it because they could afford to do that.
And I think Danny Ainge would make that gamble. And I say that knowing that Colin Sexton was that pick, and Colin Sexton looks like he's going to be not just an all-star. He's going to be a multi-time all-star.
He's been playing exceptionally well. So again, like the thing about the Mavs too is like you look at this trade and so many people as well have been saying like, well, you know, no matter what, it was still a bad trade. Who could expect that the Mavs would be like this? It's like, well, obviously not. You don't project it, but if your idea is like, well, they're only going to get late first round picks in return for trading Porzingis, and now everything changes because you thought wrong, then that doesn't mean that the trade is suddenly but. Again, it's also possible that both these teams can win a trade. It's not like the Knicks win it or the Mavs win it. Both can be successful. Both can lose it too. But again, like this is how I felt from the day the Knicks traded Porzingis. It's okay to take a player who's going to make a lot of money, who you have durability concerns with, where basically right now Porzingis' only advantage in the NBA is that he's tall. And try to use that as a winning piece and take those assets, diversify your portfolio. And when the time is right, strike for something that you really want. And the Knicks are in prime position to do that. And I'm just really excited about that.
And thank you. You did. I was waiting all week for this, and you didn't disappoint, because I know you give this stuff a ton of thought, and you deserve credit for that, because these are not off the cuff remarks. It's why when we talk about trading for Lonzo Ball or trading for Victor Oladipo, you're not trading for Lonzo Ball or Victor Oladipo. You're trading for the right to pay Lonzo Ball his next contract. You're trading for the right to potentially give Victor Oladipo his 5th year. And we could talk about the wisdom of those things in a separate conversation, and we probably will. But the Knicks, the Mavericks were paying for the right to give Kristaps Porzingis a max contract. And I think that is one part of the conversation. I guess you could argue it is the most important part of the conversation. And you said I know you've done it too. I've canvassed the league back then, and the two things that have always made me wonder are Bagley in Sacramento and SGA in LA. Now with Oklahoma City, and I think it's fair to assume that given the Clippers' offseason plans and the fact that they succeeded in executing those plans, maybe they weren't dying to have Kristaps Porzingis and his, what was the cap hold? Was it 17 million or 20? His cap hold, it was 17 million. Okay. Maybe they weren't dying to have that on the books. And if the Knicks had traded for Marvin Bagley, again, just for argument's sake, something tells me they wouldn't have gotten 2 first-round picks from the Kings. Something tells me it would have been more like Bagley and 1 protected first. And how would we be feeling right now? And I guess the only other 2 things I think are worth adding, because this is just so multi-layered, this conversation, and that's why I don't like to talk about it on Twitter, because it's not a conversation you could have into it. It's too small.
You've one tweet, and then everyone either reads into it differently, and before you know, it's like I have a thread here, but no one really cares, and it has to be spoken. It can't be written out. And this is kind of funny, but like, could the Knicks maybe use a guy like Tim Hardaway Jr. on their team right now in the right role, 3rd, 4th option? Maybe a little bit. That said, I don't terribly miss him. So, but that's more of a devil's advocate point that I just wanted to throw in there. And then what was the other one? Oh yeah, the Mavericks. I mean, we're all dancing on their grave right now. They're not going to be a what's their winning percentage? 40%. They're not going to be a 400 team the rest of the year. They're going to win more games, and that's fine. But the fact that they have even put themselves in this hole and opened up the door to the possibility that this is a lottery pick, like, my goodness, that's why you do a trade like this. And then there's so many other layers to it. Like, this trade got Steve Mills fired. Yep.
So if you want to talk from a Knicks fan perspective, if you're analyzing the trade from 18 different ways, the only one that you really care about is that Leon Rose is in this job right now, right? Because Steve Mills made this trade. So
I've got one more for you.
Please.
If the Knicks don't trade away Tim Hardaway Jr. and they keep him on the team, it's possible that they win enough games where they get out of range for the top 5 pick, or a guarantee of getting a top 5 pick. There was a really good top 5 this in that draft class. Obviously, you have Zion, who's elite. You've got Ja, who's elite. You've got RJ, who's progressing very well. DeAndre Hunter is taking a significant step forward. Garland's been injured, but he played pretty nicely against the Knicks, and he's putting games together. What happens if you fall like the Timberwolves, the Suns, who fell from 3rd to 6th, and then the Timberwolves traded up from 11 to 6 and got Jarrett Culver? What happens if the Knicks wind up with Jarrett Culver instead? And they have Tim Hardaway Jr.'s contract still in the books.
Fuck that. Imagine if they didn't draft RJ Barrett.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, is that in that draft class, there's a chance that they fall below where they don't get a top 3 pick. And that's a problem. And now we're seeing the fruits of that awful season developing right before our very eyes. Yep. And to think that Kristaps Porzingis could have been the reason, because not trading him and then having to pay him and still having Hardaway Jr. and Courtney Lee on the books and trying to figure things out like that, that's just a recipe for a mediocre team. It was the best opportunity they could have had. And right now, I mean, again, we want the Knicks to do well, but as I'm looking at Tankathon, they're sitting 11th from the top. The Mavs are tied for 8th. The Knicks are 3.5 back of the worst record. I mean, they're a game away from being tied for the 4th worst record. Like, again, it doesn't take a whole lot to just get there. And the West is really competitive. Yeah. So the bottom line is, if you can walk away with 2 top, let's say 16 picks, that's a great position to be in. But and later, I'm sure we're going to talk about this. The idea of like the Knicks have a league average net rating. So we know that they are a legit medium good team, or average team, if you will. They're not a bad team.
No, Austin Rivers, whatever it was, the 4th, 5th, 6th game of the season. I've been on bad teams before. Right. This is not that.
Right. And later we will get into the idea, I'm sure, of like, well, what happens if the Knicks just say like, well, we're still going to try for the 12th, for the play-in game and getting 10th. But like, what happens if we finish a few games out of it and we're also like in range for a top 5 pick, and we know that next year we can absolutely go for it and become that play-in team? And
well, we'll
let the things fall as they will. But it's just, to me, it's a fascinating thing to think about, because with Porzingis, the whole mindset was like, the reason the Knicks didn't do better in the 2018 draft was because they wanted to build around Porzingis, and they brought in Tim Hardaway Jr.
And they started 16 and 13.
Right. And they had other players that were good enough to get them up there. Porzingis goes down. I think the Knicks had the 2nd worst record in the NBA from that point to the end of the season, just behind the Suns. So again, it's this idea of like, you can't really take any steps back with Porzingis in that situation, because you're committed to it.
I think what you need to ask yourself as so like back then, again, they were 16 and 13. It looked pretty good. It didn't feel like this. This feels like there has been an organizational reset, that someone literally hit the reset button on the entire franchise, in terms of how they think, in terms of how they prepare, in terms of how they see themselves, in terms of, do they still see themselves as losers? Because I still think even then, like, it was like, when's the other shoe going to drop? As opposed to now, it feels more like, how can we take the next step? Which on the surface runs counter to the scenario that you just posited. But I don't necessarily know if that's the case. And the only other thing I want to say about Porzingis, and then we'll move on from that son of a bitch, is the day after the trade, I wrote something, or maybe it was a few days after the trade, whatever it was. And I essentially said, here's why you trade him. Because everybody who criticized the trade at the time, they had one thing in common, which is that the Knicks cannot get out of their own way. Their organization is a disaster. And now they trade their best player. He was butting heads with the team at the time, right? With the organization, with the front office, the whole thing. Like, how would you have ever hoped to recover in a real, genuine way with someone there who thought that little of everything that went on inside the walls of Madison Square Garden? And yeah, you could say, well, they could have fired everybody like the Knicks ended up doing. I don't know. I don't know if that kind of level of stink that he thought of this team at the time ever really wears off. To me, if you're going to have a culture reset, you got to, again, you really truly have to have a reset, which is, I think, what they did this offseason. So that's the other thing I wanted to say.